The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio. Keep your mission on your mind and your mind on your mission. This is Mission Minded with Michael Coleman.
Welcome to Tony Kurre Radio and another edition of Mission Minded with the Executive Director of the Jimmie Hale Mission. He's Michael Coleman. Michael, what's going on, man? What's happening?
Nothing, just so glad to be here and talk about another issue that affects our world very much, especially in the nonprofit world, and that's the issue of money.
And you are an expert, no doubt, in the non-for-profit world. I've got a non-for-profit myself. Of course, I have another business, for-profit, and in a lot of ways, let's start right there before we get the money aspect. I think is something that we've been thinking about for 8 or 9 weeks as we've done this show, because obviously you can't run any type of business, whether it's non-for-profit or anything else, without the cash. So we'll get into that. When you're talking about non-for-profits, explain the difference between a non-for-profit that obviously makes money, and you got more money than sometimes maybe you need, and a for-profit. And not only the differences just from the obvious, but also from the tax break standpoint.
Yeah, so from a for-profit, if I were to own a business, and I do have a side business, a boutique, and so we sell merchandise for a profit. We are taxed on that profit. Of course, after all your overhead and expenses are deducted, whatever's left that's net, you have to pay taxes on. The nonprofit world is very different. And sometimes when you say not-for-profit, people confuse that. They say, oh, well, you can't bring any money, or you have to spend all that you make. Bottom line is you can't have more than you're supposed to. That's not really what defines a nonprofit. A nonprofit is an organization that performs a specific service that's been approved by the IRS as something being good for the community. And whatever amount of money that comes in, that is not money that anyone is allowed to take. It must all go back and be invested in the organization, and its governance is controlled by a board of directors. So if I was a business owner and I made a huge profit, at the end of the day, I could use that money to expand my business. I could invest in other things, or I could just put it in my pocket if I wanted to. Not for profit, I may raise $1 million more than I spend, but I'm not at liberty to do anything with that money outside of the governance and control of a board of directors. And then they ultimately, in conjunction with the leader of the organization, usually, they decide what to do with that money. They may put it back as a rainy day fund, or they may implement new services, or they may begin to pay because in the nonprofit world, inherently the people are not paid what they're worth, so they may use it to raise the pay and income of employees. Whatever the issue is, as long as it's done in accordance with the mission and governed by the board of directors, it's perfectly legal to do so.
Okay, let's back up a little bit. You mentioned the fact, and we're talking about 501c3 stuff that is IRS dictated as far as in good for community. Who makes the call on whether something is good for the community? Are there particular parameters on that, or who makes that call?
Yeah, so the IRS, that's what it's about. So if let's say I started a not-for-profit. Very first thing you have to do is do it just like a business. You're going to incorporate the name. And so you have to go through the normal legal process where you get a tax number, all those kind of things. You have to get a number associated with all that governance, just the startup of a business. But then if you want to apply for a 501c3, you have to do that to the IRS. And then before they will give you that approval, it's a pretty tough process. Yes. Now, this was years ago when I did it. I don't know what it is now, but
it's still pretty tough.
The fee was $900 just to apply. Mm-hmm. And it could last, I've seen it last years, where people say, okay, this is what I want to do. The IRS will review your request, and then they'll have lots of questions. They send it back to you. You answer them, send it back, and you go back and forth until all the questions are answered. And it's their responsibility to determine whether this is for the public good, and that therefore money given to this organization could be counted as tax deductible. So rarely does an organization ask me in the nonprofit world, let me see your your governance, like where you started your business, they always ask you for the same thing, which is your IRS determination letter. And that's really for a nonprofit, that's your gold, because it's the one that states the IRS has reviewed your application and approved it, and you are hereby granted the authorities of 501c3, which makes all your money coming in from donors tax deductible for them.
And it's you're listening to Mission Minded, by the way. I don't know if we even mentioned that right off the top. We're jumping right in here with Michael Coleman. He's the executive director of the Jimmie Hale Mission. It's we keep your mind on your mission on your mind. It's a great show we do every single week here on Wednesdays at noon and 7 o'clock. And again, go back and listen to all of our episodes. We've done about 8 or 9 of those already at Spotify. Search Tony Kurre Radio. That's Curry with a K, Tony Kurre Radio, and you can see all of those. I'm going to play devil's advocate here because I realize there are some scumbags out there, even when it comes to the non-for-profit world. Let's say you have on a board of directors. What's a good number for a board of directors if you're starting a non-for-profit? Obviously, the more people you have involved, I would think the better, because you'd have more voices coming in. But what's a good number for a board of directors?
I personally think you should never have less than 5. Now, there is a legal requirement that says you can never have less than 3.
Okay.
And so that can be for foundations as well, any kind of entity like that. Like you'll have a 501c4, and I'm not near as familiar as all the rules of that as I am the 501c3s. But typically, what you need is you need great diversity on your board. Me as the executive director, I've never, even though you'll see this on a lot of boards, I've never thought it was appropriate for me to be a voting member, a permanent member of the board. Now it gets you get some real gray area, but the problem is an organization is supposed to be detached from the executive director or the CEO. And so I've never thought it was appropriate that I have the voting rights. Now I set the agenda, I'm casting the vision, I'm driving the organization, but I need somebody totally independent from me to be able to look at what I'm presenting them and then be able to decide, is this within the approved mission statement? Is this good governance? And I really shouldn't be in that decision-making process other than, explaining what it is I'm trying to do and wanting to do, especially when you deal with money and public trust. I tell the public all the time, look, as a matter of fact, I'm going, our fiscal years from July to June. And so I'm going through this right now where I'm already preparing my budget, my upcoming budget. So I'm crunching all the numbers. Well, when I give my budget request to the board, I don't need to be voting on that because, of course, I'm always going to be voting in the affirmative for something that I want.
Sure.
A good board pushes back and says and asks tough questions, and that's good governance. So you get these conflicts of interest. Like if you do a family foundation, lots of times only people on the board are family members, or you get executive directors who are also vice chairs of the board. I've seen, and so you get. It's just not as clean a process, and for people who understand it behind the scenes, it just sends up a red flag. It's not illegal, but it sends up a red flag.
And there's another thought process too in that, and I've been asked to be on several boards of directors for 501c3s here in town. They don't get paid. Now some board directors do, but in a lot of cases you have board of directors and it's not like a regular 40-hour job. They're coming in maybe once a week or once every couple of weeks to vote on particular things. But those board of directors, to keep it clean, they're not earning any money, correct?
That's right. Now, there are exceptions. So nonprofits have to supply to the government every year an accounting of every dollar of your board members. And so we have to file every nonprofit. If you have a 501c3, you have an obligation to file what's known as a Form 990. And so if you ever want to look at an organization, it'll tell you all their assets. This is all public information. You can do searches for, a nonprofit 990s, and there's organizations that track all that and will tell you how many hours who the board members are, how many hours they're putting in. Now, you see this on TV a lot in the movies. I've noticed it. You have like a for-profit board of directors, and people sometimes can get, it's a very powerful position, and people can get paid on those boards. I remember famously, like Colin Powell was such a well-regarded, respected man coming out of the military. And you're like, well, what's Colin Powell going to do? He could write books, he could do whatever, and he did all that. But he also served on several boards of directors, and of course, those were all paid. That's not typically how it is in the nonprofit world. Is you are volunteering your time, your expertise, your wisdom, skill set, and you come into an environment with the idea of you approve of the mission and what's happening, and you're there to offer your expertise to help make it better.
He's Michael Coleman. I'm Tony Kurre. This is Mission Minded exclusively here on Tony Kurre Radio. You can also listen back and binge listen to all of our great episodes that James Michael Keats has put up on Spotify at Tony Kurre Radio. That's Kurre with a K. Just search Tony Kurre Radio or Mission Minded with Michael Coleman. You can find all those. Again, I'm going to play devil's advocate here because I know that there are a lot of wonderful, incredible organizations. In most cases, the majority are some, but there are some people that run non-for-profits purely to cheat the tax situation and make some cash. What's to say you don't have a board that is all in cahoots with the owner of this particular non-for-profit, and they are all getting paid? So you're making a lot of money. There is a certain percentage, and we get into that as well, a certain percentage of the money has to go back out to the service that you're providing, but then the rest of the money is going to the board directors. Does that happen?
Well, because I understand the human condition, I know that anything that mankind does, there's people who will utilize the rules and take advantage of it. You see it oftentimes in churches. You see it in nonprofit organizations. I will tell you, while it's the exception, this is where the responsibility goes over to the donors. So I would encourage any donor, before you write, especially a large check, is take the time to look at the past 990s, to look at, and it's much easier now because you can research all this online, to look at the mission statement and then visit that nonprofit to see, are they producing what they say they are? I mean, don't be afraid to ask the tough questions. Nonprofits that are doing what they should do are transparent. I will give you a great example that I learned as I was learning the nonprofit world. When I was in Montgomery Academy actually had a philanthropic class, Philanthropy 101, and they taught their people, these were 10th graders, so they're preparing them to be community-minded, civic-minded, give back, help out people. So they said, if you're ever involved with a nonprofit, whether it's a volunteer or as a board member, is that you need to ask them, to see their 990 and ask to see a current budget. And if a nonprofit is not willing to show you those things, then that instantly is a sign that you need to not be involved in that nonprofit. No matter who you know or what you're involved with, that means something is happening behind the scenes that they don't want the average person to know. And so I thought that was a very simple way, but a very important way for people, if you like, hey, I really love what this nonprofit's doing, and they're helping women or children or minorities, whatever it is, they're helping people overcome barriers and obstacles. I've seen people just jump headlong into these organizations without doing due diligence first, and then ultimately get very, very discouraged and disappointed at what's being promoted on their website and what's being promoted to the public is not really what's happening behind the scenes.
And those non-for-profits are more than happy to show you everything they've got. And Jimmie Hale Mission obviously is one of those. They're more than willing to show. And again, they want you to ask. So don't ever feel like you're calling them out or is this a real business? Because now, because of the GoDaddies and all these different websites, you can make something look really, really good. People can get online, they can search it, they can see pictures, they can see all these things. They go, this looks very legit. And maybe they're sinking all their money into the digital marketing aspect to make their non-for-profit look really good so they can screw you down the road. I only know this because I had a grandmother who used to give to some type of charity. I forget what it was. And, of course, there's mailing lists out there. Some send out mailing lists, some don't. And next thing you know, she gave to 13 different organizations, and 10 of them she didn't even know what they were for. And, again, it wasn't a lot. It was $10 to $50 a month, but she's stroking these checks, and it broke her down. But if you do that over the course of a couple of years, the next thing you know, you're giving thousands of dollars. What is the percent? I think this is really, really fascinating. and maybe this percentage has changed, but what percent of the money you bring into a non-for-profit has to go back out to keep your status?
Yeah, you made reference to that a few minutes ago, and Tony, I'll be honest with you. I don't know that there is legally. Maybe it used to be. I don't know that right now.
I had heard 17 cents in the dollar, and this is when we started our 501c3 about 11 years ago. Now, I may be totally wrong there, but
Well, here's what I'll tell you. What I hear more often than not is people wanting to do due diligence. Oftentimes, will ask, "What are your administrative costs?"
Yes.
And so they've been told, well, if you don't give to someone that has a high administrative cost, because that means it's not going into the programming and stuff like that. So let me explain for our listeners. That can be a guide, but it's always not necessarily a good guide. So for instance, there is no standard way that the IRS counts or that the industry covers exactly what's included in administrative cost. So it's kind of a ghost out there. I have researched this, and I'll research it and I'll see one thing and they're like, this is what administrative costs are. But then you research somewhere else. So there's not a governance or a governing board standard that says this is how you figure up your administrative costs. But I know what they're saying. They're saying, hey, look, if I'm paying for food at the country, but only 50% of everything else is going to pay your lights, and so only half my money is getting over to the country, I don't think that's a good percentage. I understand the feeling about that. But like, for instance, here at the mission, I will open up our books and I'll show them that, yes, we house people and run a program, but that means we have to pay for utilities. We have to buy them food. We have to take care of special needs that some may count it as administrative costs and others are not. So what I would encourage people to do is say, listen, go there personally, ask the tough questions, and don't be afraid of what your gut tells you. You don't necessarily have to know every single thing. If your gut is telling you, you know what, something just doesn't feel right, I can't necessarily explain it, then I would encourage them to walk away. But don't get hung up on just a raw number. And I've had people call me, what's your administrative cost? And they're looking for, it's got to be 10 or under. And I might say, well, it's 17% or 18%. They're like, okay, I'm not going to support that because that's too much. Yet they have no idea how that breakdown goes. They're just going off what somebody said. Don't give to anybody whose administrative costs are over $10. Well, our administrative costs may be higher than an organization that's just collecting money and then sending it in bulk, and it's just one or two people working from home. So their administrative costs are not going to be high. They're not paying for a building, they're not paying for an office, utilities, all that kind of stuff. So it's really not as simple as what some want to make it. I'm not trying at all. Like I said, I am completely transparent, but we house, a couple of hundred people a month. And so we do, our water bills run high because they have to shower and have water, and that's just all a part of caring for our program. Some people go, no, that's necessary. Yeah. But some people would count that as administrative costs.
Well, and as opposed to a business, a non-for-profit, he's Michael Coleman, the executive director of the Jimmie Hale Mission. I'm Tony Kurre. This is Mission Minded here on Tony Kurre Radio, also on Spotify. As you are all encapsulated. I mean, you're doing it all at the Jimmie Hale Mission. You've got the mission, you're minded to do it, and you're providing those services in-house. I don't know how much stuff you out-resource, but in most cases, people are raising money for a particular cause, and then they're sending that money out somewhere else. You see it almost every single weekend at a restaurant where someone's raising money or awareness or advocating for a particular 501c3. They're raising money, and then they're sending that money to that. You're doing everything in-house, so your administrative costs obviously would be much different than it would be if we're just out there doing a cornhole tournament and trying to raise $50,000 over the weekend. I think it's really interesting because, and again, we're going to mention several here, but it's not to say they're not doing things right. But when you're talking about huge organizations like muscular dystrophy, I know there was a lot of brushback on Jerry Lewis towards the end of his run with the MDA and the big telethons they used to have because of their administrative cost. And his point was always, hey, if someone's bringing in $1 million a year to the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and I have to pay them $200,000 a year to do that, that's what I'm going to do because they are really they're really good at what they do. How do you How do you differentiate those numbers? If you know someone's going to be a mover shaker and he's bringing money in and he's well worth every dime, do you have administrators that you're willing to pay that kind of money to because you know they can bring it in?
Well, I tell you, I won't use my own personal example, but I'll use one that I think is very applicable to what you're saying. So there's a local college that my daughter teaches at, and every year they do a fundraiser. And they used to just have local people or whatever, but then now they're known for bringing in national people, sometimes even controversial people, but people who have an opinion out there who are either in the media or politics or somebody of stature. And they typically have to pay $100,000 for them to come in and do a speech.
Yep. And
their argument is this: listen, our goal is to raise $1 million for our college and at a minimum. Now, we could have somebody show up and pay them $10,000 to speak, but a lot of those seats wouldn't be filled because they're not somebody who draws the interest of the public. So while the public may be outraged and say, wow, $100,000 for a speaker, that's ridiculous. But you have to look at don't get caught up in, well, that's too much to pay if that person can deliver on the $1 million, because your goal is the $1 million, and how you get there and how the money is distributed, to me, is ultimately irrelevant. Now, I think you better make sure they can deliver on what you think they can, because if not, then you are held accountable as a leader for making those kind of choices. But I think it's short-sighted. So I'll give you one on a very simple level.
Yeah.
I was starting when I started a nonprofit, I was trying to get the word out. So I had some pins made up with our logo and our tagline on it. Now, they look like very nice pins, but basically I got them for 59 cents a piece. But they were metal pins. They were done very nicely. And, we didn't have any money. And so at our dinner, I put one at each location just for people to write a check, pledge card, or put it in their purse and take it with them. And I had a board member who brought somebody in, and he instantly looked down and said, well, if they can afford to give away pens like this, then they don't need my money. And so it was that idea of, well, you're wasting money. So if you're going to waste your money, don't ask me for any money. And so when the board member told me that, we sat down and had this conversation. I said, all right, now listen, this is where we sometimes think that nonprofits are not businesses.
Yep.
And this is where nonprofits fail. You not only have to deliver services, but you have to be able to run a nonprofit as a business, because it is a business. And the practice of giving away merchandise with your brand on it and trying to create a buzz and the reminder so that people will think about you when it comes time to donate is standard practice. But to that person, he had made a differentiation of, no, they're wasting money. I'm not going to give them money to buy a bunch of pens, rather than say, oh, no, they have to get the word out. And this is one way people will leave here and not just forget about the dinner, not forget about supporting them. But that goes back to that, oh, I'm not going to support you if you're over 10% on your overhead cost. And so you'll meet all sorts of people, and they're very peculiar. And all I try to do is say, understand your position. I try to ask them how they arrived at that. Lots of times I find out that they've been burned by other nonprofits.
Yes, sir.
And so I don't try to talk them out of it. What I ask them for is, I said, I validate what they're saying, because it's coming from a place that's real to them. And so I don't want to say, oh, that's stupid or anything like that. I want to validate it. But then I just ask them for the opportunity to show them they think this is terrible. Let me show you why we do what we do and the alternatives, and then have an authentic conversation about it. And more times than not, they go, oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that makes sense now. Mm-hmm. And then you can bring them on board. But this is what it's very exhausting dealing with donors. They're the lifeblood of the organization. but so many people come at you from so many different angles and experiences, and you have to take the time one-on-one to sit down for small donors and big donors and to walk them through that process.
You talk about those speakers too, and obviously we have more churches per capita down here in the great state of Alabama than any other state in the union. Sure. That being said, I think there's this thought process that since it's a non-for-profit, it's a church, or maybe it's a school or an institution or a non-for-profit school, that everyone's working for free. I'd be more than happy to do that. Well, when they start seeing the kind of money that's being generated by having these fundraisers, I can think about Monday morning quarterback clubs that I've gone to. Then I'd be more than happy to speak. And next thing you know, they're stroking me a check. I'm like, oh, no. They're like, no, I promise, take the money. You've brought quite a bit in here. But I've had friends of mine that make a pretty good business choice by just speaking at churches every Sunday, which works pretty well. I want to get into, and I know we want to talk about money, and I want to continue this conversation in our next show. We have a few more minutes left though, but you had a great idea, and this, and I'm surprised you didn't bring it up, because you are a man who thinks outside the box. You get that Jimmie Hale Mission is a non-for-profit, but it's an organization, it's a business, and you want to get eyeballs out there. You can do billboards, you can get on radio programs, you can do things with Tony Curre Radio, you can do all those things. But you had a brilliant idea of doing the Jimmie Hale Mission license plate. Tell me how that went down and what your board of directors originally thought of that idea.
Yeah, so and I'll give credit where credit's due, is actually my development director, but that I get some of my best ideas by stealing from other people.
Now, you told me that was your idea, but I'll go ahead and give you the
well, that really comes from an episode that we talked about earlier, which how important it is to collaborate and not to try to run an organization in a silo. And so anytime we're coming up with ideas, I always empower the people around me to bring ideas and vet those ideas and discuss them. And so, yeah, that was one of his things. It's been a challenge. I'll be completely honest with you. But the idea was this. You're looking for additional sources of revenue. The state of Alabama requires you to get 1,000 tags. And so that means you have to get 1,000 people to sign up saying, I'm willing to purchase a Jimmie Hale Mission tag. And that's an incredible challenge, one that's still going on. But the idea is that once they invest in that tag, yes, you have, and we even said, we will pay for your first tag of $50. Mm-hmm. And people go, that's $50,000. And I said, okay, let me walk you through this. If we paid $50, we're going to get refunded $41,000. So if we give them $50,000 to get this going, they will refund us back $41,000. So basically we made a $9,000 investment. However, the next year when people renew, that whole $50,000 will come to us, and hopefully you grow it. So that's a great example. Thank you for bringing that up. Mm-hmm. Of where sometimes we get short-sighted, but I'm like, no, you have to think long-term. We make an investment up front, but it's for long-term investments. And I'll just give you some just general other thinking on that. We started a race every year, and we don't do the race to raise funds. We want to make money, but at minimum we want to break even. But that's really more about community awareness than anything else. So everything about that event needs to be top of the line, because something as easy as a t-shirt. So if somebody says, well, I'm trying to cut corners, so look, I can get t-shirts done for $5 a piece, and you get these cheap, thin t-shirts that nobody likes and nobody's going to wear after the race. But if you say, okay, let's get a $10 or $12 wholesale t-shirt, one that they will wear that's comfortable, that they will wear for the next couple of years, and really do it up right, because then people will wear that and they will advertise, and they'll be, but Jimmie Hale Mission, or whatever your organization is, will be associated with quality. Yep. Rather than just, hey, I'm just trying to get by on this event and squeeze every dollar I'm at. So the idea is you get people to the event, you give their swag bag, you put some really cool, important stuff in there, and they're like, wow, I want to come back next year to Jimmie Hale, because they always put on a great race, and the swag is always out of this world. It's such high quality. The medals are high quality. And yes, we don't raise quite as much, but we're building a brand. We're building the quality. So one of the things I told my board of directors was, look, we're going to make money, but that's not even the goal. don't focus on the money, focus on the branding and us getting our name out in the community and meeting new people and helping them to see that if this is how they put on a race, then I'm telling you, I've got a lot of confidence in that information because everything they do is quality. I'm not talking about unnecessary extravagance, but I'm talking about quality, that the whole event goes smoothly. And then they go, you know what, if they're caring for people over there, if their race is anything like their care, they're doing it right.
The t-shirt business. I mean, you're spot on because I worked for radio stations for 40 years, so we had some pretty thin t-shirts that we were throwing out at different concerts and things like that. And again, I never understood why. And I'll tell you a quick story. I never understood why we'd make people pay for t-shirts. We used to sell t-shirts. I'm like, they're advertising for us. Just give them a good t-shirt. Let's bite the bullet here. They're going to have these t-shirts for years and years. And if the t-shirt is made well and it looks good, they'll even wear it, to other concerts. So they're out.
Oh, absolutely.
So we're not going to do it. And so we got so ahead of ourselves when I was working in Louisville, Kentucky, that we used to have really good t-shirts. Well, my boss said, well, the hell with this. Rather than give them out, we're going to start charging people for them. We had a t-shirt that was $27. It was a $27 shirt. It was called the Pocket Weasel. A weasel was our mascot, and it had a pocket on it with the weasel head coming out of the pocket. And he's like, we're going to make a $3 million on these T-shirts. And, of course, we put them out there, and we sold 35 of them. And we took an absolute bath on it because people would wear our stuff because it was free and it was cool looking, but they weren't willing to make a $27 commitment to it. So
that's right.
There you have it. Hey, Michael, great stuff, man. Again, I love these conversations because I didn't get into even my first question about how to raise money, where to find it, how to increase it, how to fight for it. Is it competitive? So we'll do that next week. Is that cool with you?
Yeah, it's a huge topic. We could talk endlessly about just this area of fundraising and how to interact with donors and just how you approach it. And I will tell you, I came at it when I started from absolutely no experience. I've made tons of mistakes along the way. And we're still standing, so I've got a lot to share, both good and bad practices.
Let's make some money and make an impact next week here in Mission Might. Michael, thank you so much.
Thank you, brother.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Curre Radio.